All right, let's jump straight into this explainer and dig up a totally forgotten, fiercely undocumented chapter of Oklahoma City's underground music scene. You know, when we think about music history, we usually picture these meticulously kept tour logs and glossy magazine covers, right? We have digital databases today that can literally tell us exactly who played where on a random Tuesday in 1982. But what about the stories that just slipped through the cracks? Today, we're exploring a hidden, subterranean world of rock that survived entirely on word of mouth, sweat, and just pure, raw energy.
I want you to imagine witnessing a legendary musical moment that, entirely by design, completely defies official tour records. Picture this. You're packed into a cramped, smoky room. You're right in the thick of the crowd, watching actual rock and roll icons play a set that the rest of the world will never, ever know happened. There are zero cameras, no major media, no paper trail. Honestly, if you weren't standing in that room, breathing that air, the moment basically never existed in the historical record.
And that brings us to the absolute core of today's mystery, the phenomenon of the ghost show. Now, we're not talking about a canceled gig or some forgettable opening act here. A ghost show is a high-impact, totally untracked cultural milestone. It's an unbelievable performance by a massive talent, usually in some bizarre, unconventional space. And it survives only in the memories of the lucky few who just happen to stumble through the right doors at exactly the right time.
To really grasp why these ghost shows were such a big deal, we have to talk about the massive contrast in what Oklahoma City sounded like back then. On the surface, if you lived in OKC in the late 70s or early 80s, you were swimming in a very homogenized sound. It was the absolute peak of REO Speedwagon, AC/DC, and mainstream country music. But if you knew where to look, there was a totally different frequency broadcasting to the misfits. It was this chaotic, glorious mashup of punk, new wave, and grimy pub rock.
So, here's the million-dollar question. Why are these iconic names completely missing from modern historical databases? Seriously, how does a literal rock legend roll into a major American city and not leave a single paper trail for us to find today? Well, it wasn't magic, and no, it wasn't some grand conspiracy. It was actually just a natural byproduct of how the underground plumbing of the music industry worked back then.
The concept of the club circuit gap perfectly explains this. It basically meant that if a gig wasn't officially tracked by a national archivist or a major newspaper, poof, it vanished. See, touring bands in the 70s would have these off nights while driving between major hub cities. To make a quick buck, or honestly just to blow off some steam, they'd get a local promoter to throw together a last-minute show over a landline phone. They'd print up some cheap handbills, maybe get a shout-out on an indie radio station, and boom, that was the whole shebang. No booking agencies, no internet, just word of mouth spreading like wildfire. Let's head over to our first legendary venue, the Longbranch. This place was the ultimate sweat-soaked roadhouse for bands who just wanted a gritty, raw environment. Tucked away on Southwest Agnew, this was absolutely not some pristine, radio-friendly concert hall. It was loud, it was filthy. The stage basically felt like it was just part of the floor. It was a true musicians' club where national acts could just drop in, let loose, and experiment without any corporate polish.
This hits the nail on the head regarding why an absolute titan like Bo Diddley would skip a fancy concert hall just to play right on the floor of a dive bar. Diddley had this incredible everyman philosophy when he toured. He literally couldn't care less about playing some massive, sterile stadium if the crowd's energy was dead. He craved that face-to-face, visceral reaction. You only get that when you are physically surrounded by fans who are starving for something real.
Because of this wild, informal circuit, locals actually witnessed a de facto New York Dolls reunion that was never officially billed as one. After the Dolls famously splintered in 1975, the members were kind of floating around. Between 76 and 79, they all had these solo projects, but the boundaries were super porous. So a local promoter might book David Johansen at the Longbranch, but then Johnny Thunders would just happen to tag along and sit in. The marquee didn't say New York Dolls, but if you were in that room, you were getting hit with that exact same explosive magic.
Being up close and personal with those raw pub rock mechanics was like getting a masterclass in musical economy, something a massive stadium tour just can't replicate. I mean, think about it. When you strip away the giant lighting rigs, the barricades, and the heavily engineered soundboards, what's actually left? Pure, unadulterated talent. It's in these totally undocumented ghost shows that music gets stripped right down to its absolute bare bones.
Now, as the 70s bled into the 80s, all that raw energy from Southwest Agnew started to evolve, and it actually moved underground.
The Roadhouse vibe of the Longbranch definitely laid the foundation, but this new generation, they wanted their own headquarters. They needed a space completely dedicated to the exploding punk and new wave scenes, the stuff that was just barely starting to pop up on early MTV. And finally, in October 1982, they got it.
Welcome to the subterranean world of the Bowery. It was this tiny basement that basically functioned as an alternate universe for the local youth. Hidden right underneath the Plaza Court building, it billed itself as OKC's only new music club. For the skate punks, the artists, the weirdos who just did not fit into that traditional country rock mold, walking down those basement stairs was literally like stepping through a portal straight into a CBGB-style safe haven. I absolutely love this story from Ray Von Schlegater. He was a New York transplant who walked in expecting a full-on brawl, but instead found this amazing community of artistic weirdos. Ray came all the way from Queens, right? So he's expecting the dangerous, seedy vibe of the actual Bowery in Manhattan. He literally armors up in his motorcycle jacket and heavy engineer boots, completely ready to fight. But instead of throwing punches, the locals just bought him a beer. It became this incredibly tight-knit alternative family forming right in the middle of the state.
And brace yourselves, because it is genuinely mind-blowing to realize the sheer magnitude of world-class talent that came down into this tiny, unassuming basement. We're talking future stadium headliners like REM and the Red Hot Chili Peppers, local legends like the Flaming Lips, plus the Violent Femmes and the Bangles. These are acts that went on to define entire decades of music history, and they were playing cramped, sweaty, underground basement gigs in Oklahoma City. Wild, right?
Now, to be fair, as the club's soundman Lee Murphy vividly remembers, dealing with these alt-music media darlings wasn't always a walk in the park. Not every single ghost show was some pristine, transcendent masterpiece. The Replacements, for instance, were absolutely notorious for being wildly unpredictable. Murphy recalled they'd show up hideously drunk, totally out of tune, and just straight-up combative. But you know what? That chaos was exactly what made the scene so special. It was uncurated, it was messy, and it was 100% real.
And beyond the live music, the club itself was this massive sensory overload. It perfectly blended a fiercely competitive vintage fashion scene with these groundbreaking DJ sets you literally couldn't hear anywhere else. The Bowery was just as much about the crowd as the bands on stage. Regulars would raid thrift stores and turn the floor into a nightly runway, genuinely dropping the jaws of the touring musicians. And when the bands took a break, DJs like Roscoe and John Mooningham were spinning alternative tracks that absolutely no radio station in the state would support.
At the end of the day, the Bowery wasn't just a physical building. It was an emotional anchor, a place where outcasts could safely figure out who they actually were. For regulars like Steffi Corcoran, this hits right at the heart of why these unrecorded places matter so deeply. If you felt like a total alien in your own hometown, these gritty little venues were your sanctuary. It wasn't just about catching a cool set by a touring band, it was about finally finding your tribe.
So, what is the big takeaway from all this raw, undocumented history? Well, the Longbranch is gone. The original Bowery basement closed up shop back in 1985. But honestly, the physical buildings were never the point. The point is the lasting cultural imprint these spaces left on the people who lived them. The creative energy generated in those tiny, cramped rooms rippled outward, permanently shaping the artistic sensibilities of an entire generation of locals.
These undocumented moments prove that true creative power doesn't need to be perfectly curated or logged into some database to permanently change lives. The legacy of the Ghost Show teaches us that the absolute best stories are usually accidental. They happen way outside the official narrative, and even when they completely vanish from the history books, they leave behind this incredible creative blueprint fueled by pure energy for everyone lucky enough to be in the room.
Keep looking for those secret histories in your own city, because I promise you, the most fascinating stories are the ones you just happen to stumble into. Whether it's a basement club, a dive bar, or some secret underground art space, ghost shows are still happening right now, completely off the grid. So I leave you with this. Have you ever been part of a moment too raw, too electric to be documented? What is your unrecorded story? Think about it, and remember that sometimes the best things in life are the ones that never make it onto the official record. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep your eyes open for the history hiding right beneath your feet.